Okay, we're going to do a little database project. The idea is to have a database consisting of geographic coordinates, latitude and longitude, so that we can pick those up either through JavaScript in a web page or on an Android device and have them display on a map with pins or markers. So the first thing we're going to need is sort of database. Now the idea on this one is that it's sort of a family history database where a person in the family may have lived throughout time. So we can pick up that and place it on a map and possibly track how the family's moved through ages. Even if you're sort of doing Pokemon Go, it's the same sort of thing. So we're just going to keep it simple, and I'm going to create a database. Now, if you're doing a project, a database normally consists of 2 external tables and a link table. And that is exactly how our database is going to be. We're going to think of the entities. We're going to have a person entity. We're going to have a location where they have lived. And we're going to link the person to the location in a table called lived at. And this is a relational database, so we're going to build the relations between the two. So a person, okay, will have lived at one or more locations. Okay, and a location could have been lived in by one or more people. So that's the start of my database. That's my 3 table. I'm going to have a 4th table as well. I'm going to have a table which is just going to have a sort of listing of events. And what I mean by that, where did I pick up the information through history about where this person lived? It could have been on a census record, it could have been on a birth certificate, a death certificate, a marriage certificate. I could pick it up from a letter. It could be anything, it could be other. So I'm going to have a list of events in here: birth, marriage, death, and I'm going to link it to my lived at table. An event may be used 1 or more times, okay, in my table. So that gives me a suitable table for a project, for 4 linked relational tables. So my next thing is to sort of work out what the fields are for these tables. So we start off by writing down the table name. Notice I'm capitalising the P, always do that. Just in design, I don't think it really matters in PHP MyAdmin or MySQL, but it's certainly good for design purposes. Then you know you're talking about a table, not a field. So a person. Just about every table I have is going to have an ID for the primary key, and this one I'm going to call person ID, underline it for the primary key. I'm obviously going to need their first name and their last name. Now in families you can have sort of grandfathers and grandchildren all having the same name, like Henry Hans as Henry Hans Senior and then Henry Hans Junior. So what I really require is another field called the birth year, so that I can sort of know which one I'm talking about. So that is my person table. I'm going to have a crack at my location table now. Now the location, I'm going to have it with a location ID. This is one way of designing. There's many more, and one of them is rather difficult to go through. You'll meet that in your course. I'm just plucking these from my head, which is a good way to start. You can then use more formal methods to refine your design later. So location ID, what do I need for my location? I'm going to need, well, where it is, geographical coordinates, must have these, latitude, longitude, need those for the actual pins that go into the map. It's going to work on latitude and longitudes. And then I am going to have another field because let's say we need the first line of the address, just for completeness sake. We don't really need that, but maybe it won't be filled, maybe we'll put it in, who knows. But I definitely need latitude and longitude. The next one I'm going to look at is the events table. Events. That is going to have a simple event ID, and an event, birth, marriage, death, residence, other, in that. The last table I'm going to look at is the actual link table. These are all primary keys. These are going to appear in my linked table as a foreign key. So let's start off with lived at, okay, and then let's put a primary key, and let's have its own primary key. Lived at ID. This might cause a problem later on. We'll discuss that when we get to it. So that's the primary key. But for each of these, because they're linked, I'm going to have to use the primary key in here as a foreign key. So I'm going to call that one person ID. I'm not going to underline it, but I may indicate that it's a foreign key by putting F key next to it. And we have it linked to the location. So location ID as a foreign key, and event ID as a foreign key. So it's okay having all these keys, but we also need some data which will go into the table. And the two pieces of data I'm going to have, if they've lived at a particular address, maybe I need to know the date from and the date to. So when did they live at that address? So that pretty much is my database and the fields that I need. All I need to do is work out the data type they are. So I can quickly go through this. Normally I would do a table. Perhaps I won't go through a table at the moment. I'll just list them on here. It's not my intention to teach you how to design the database, it's my intention to teach you how to code it. So first name, person ID for a start off is going to be, any ID is going to be an auto increment, so we're going to let the database decide it, and it's going to be an integer. So that's an integer, so the same will go for this one, auto increment integer, auto int, auto int, auto int. First name is going to be a variable character. If you're doing access, this would be text, but it's a variable character. We need to make it large enough to hold pretty large first name, so let's make it 25 characters. That's going to be a variable character. Let's make that large enough, 30. And birth year is going to be an integer. We could put some constraints on this, so we could say no later than 2016, no earlier than the year 0. It doesn't really matter. At the moment, I'm not bothered with constraints or anything, just getting the database up and running. Latitude and longitude, now they are strange ones. What I really want these to be is sort of a latitude and longitude may look like this. So certainly integers are out of the picture, and they are actually called floats. So I'm going to have both of those as floats, and the first line of the address, well, that's going to be a variable, and let's make it large enough to hold, so let's give it 50. Event, so birth, death, marriage, what have you, that is going to be a variable character. Let's make it 25. I might change that later. And lived at, because all of these need to link together, need to be the same data type. So person ID needs to be an int, location ID needs to be an int, event ID needs to be an int, and the date from, so I'm thinking of dates like 1960, I'm not bothered with the day, month, just bothered with the year, so again we can use ints for those too. So there we go, I've got my data, I've got everything I need to get my database going. So we'll nip over to PHP MyAdmin, MySQL, and let's create this database.